What would you do when those sworn to uphold justice become agents of injustice? When the ones tasked with protecting your family turn their authority into a weapon against them? For one father, the answer was clear: fight back. It wasn't in the safety of a courtroom or behind the walls of a legal system. It was on the streets, where his teenage son was wrongfully accused and humiliated by racist cops. A moment of routine turned into a battle for dignity, rights, and truth. A father's love collided head-on with prejudice, exposing a system designed to break spirits instead of building trust. This is the story of a man who stood his ground when no one else would. A father who refused to bow to injustice, even when the odds were stacked against him. Stay with us to uncover a fight for truth that turned the streets into a battleground, and a father's courage into a symbol of hope. As we reflect on this real-life story, subscribe, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell for more daily stories that need to be heard. Hit that subscribe button and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Isaiah Brown was not just a father, he was a cornerstone of his community. A small business owner who had built his life on hard work and respect, he was known for lending a hand when neighbors needed it, for mentoring at-risk youth, and for being the kind of man who believed that change started with personal responsibility. In his eyes, success wasn't just measured by what he built, but by the lives he touched along the way. For Isaiah, his family was everything. His pride and joy was his son, Caleb Brown, an 18-year-old high school senior on the brink of a promising future. Caleb wasn't just any teenager, he was ambitious, driven, and kind-hearted. A natural leader on his school's debate team and a standout athlete, Caleb had already secured a scholarship to a top-tier university. He was a young man with dreams bigger than the small suburban town where he'd grown up, a place where history cast long shadows and progress moved at a crawl. This town, with its tree-lined streets and neatly kept lawns, had its charm on the surface. But just beneath that picturesque exterior lay the remnants of a history that many refused to confront. Stories of unspoken racial divides and quiet inequities circulated quietly among those who'd lived there long enough to notice. Isaiah had always been careful, teaching Caleb how to navigate a world that often saw them differently. Keep your hands visible, speak clearly, stay calm. These were the lessons Isaiah had repeated countless times, hoping Caleb would never have to use them. But on a Friday night, those lessons would be tested in a way neither of them could have imagined. It was supposed to be a simple evening. Caleb had spent a few hours at a friend's house, celebrating the end of midterms. He had left early, mindful of the curfew his parents had set. Driving Isaiah's old sedan, he was less than 10 minutes from home when the familiar red and blue lights lit up his rear-view mirror. At first, Caleb thought it was a mistake. He wasn't speeding. His registration was up to date. There was no logical reason to be pulled over. He slowed down, pulling onto the shoulder of a quiet residential street. The air was still, the faint sound of crickets, the only noise besides the hum of the car's engine. Caleb rolled down his window, keeping both hands on the steering wheel just as his father had taught him. But what began as an ordinary traffic stop quickly took a different turn. The officer approached, his flashlight slicing through the darkness, landing on Caleb's face. The questions came fast and sharp. "Where are you coming from? What are you doing in this neighborhood? Is this your car?" Caleb answered each one calmly, respectfully, but his answers didn't seem to matter. Another officer appeared on the scene, then another. Soon, what should have been a brief interaction escalated. The officer asked Caleb to step out of the car. Confused but compliant, he did as he was told. What happened next defied reason. Caleb was ordered to place his hands on the hood of the car, his feet spread apart, while the officers searched him and the vehicle. There was no explanation, no probable cause, just orders barked in rapid succession. Inside the house, just a few blocks away, Isaiah's phone buzzed. It was Caleb, his voice steady but laced with something his father hadn't heard before: fear. "Dad, they pulled me over. I didn't do anything wrong." Isaiah didn't hesitate. Grabbing his keys, he headed out the door, his mind racing. He had prepared Caleb for moments like this, but nothing could prepare a father for hearing the worry in his son's voice, knowing that no amount of preparation could shield him from the reality of the situation. The officers, meanwhile, weren't interested in explanations or context. They were fixated on Caleb's presence in what they deemed an unfamiliar neighborhood, the old car he was driving, the color of his skin. To them, none of his accomplishments, his character, or his future mattered. The growing tension between Caleb and the officers was invisible to the neighbors peeking through their curtains, to the cars passing by on the main road just a block away. But for Caleb, those minutes stretched into a lifetime. And for Isaiah, speeding toward the scene, each second felt like a countdown to a moment he could only hope he wouldn't regret. What Isaiah didn't know as he rounded the corner was that this night would be one where the strength of his convictions, the depth of his love for his son, and his willingness to confront injustice would all be tested, not in theory, not in words, but in action. The night had already turned from routine to tense, but for Caleb Brown, things were about to take a dramatic and unjust turn. The officers, now standing in a small circle around him, began asking questions that had nothing to do with a traffic stop. "There's been a robbery in the area," one officer said, his tone accusatory. "You fit the description." Caleb blinked in disbelief. A robbery? He'd spent the evening playing video games at a friend's house, nowhere near the supposed crime. He tried to explain, his voice calm but firm. "I've been at my friend Michael's place. You can call him. I just left there and I'm on my way home." But his words fell on deaf ears. The officers weren't listening. They were searching for a narrative that fit their assumptions. They asked him to empty his pockets, turning what should have been a simple explanation into a demeaning display. When they found nothing, their tone only grew sharper. "Where's the money? Where's the stolen item?" Caleb shook his head. "I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't done anything wrong." But to the officers, his innocence didn't matter. One of them stepped closer, his hand resting on his belt. "You're not cooperating," the officer said, his voice low and intimidating. "I'm answering your questions," Caleb replied, his voice beginning to tremble but still steady. "I didn't steal anything." The officer didn't respond. Instead, he grabbed Caleb's arm, twisting it behind his back. "You're under arrest for suspicion of theft," the officer announced, ignoring Caleb's protests. "Wait, what? I didn't do anything," Caleb shouted, his voice rising now. He struggled against the grip, but didn't resist, knowing it would only make things worse. The other officer stepped in, forcing Caleb to the ground. Gravel scraped against his skin as they pushed him down, handcuffs clicking into place with a cold finality. By this point, the scene had drawn attention. Porch lights flickered on. A few neighbors stepped outside, watching from their driveways and sidewalks. And then, from the corner of the block, someone pulled out a phone and began recording. The video captured it all. Caleb on the ground, his face pressed against the pavement, the officers standing over him, shouting commands, the sheer imbalance of power in the scene. The person recording, a young woman on her way home from a late shift, could be heard in the background. "This is wrong," she said quietly. "He's just a kid." The officers didn't notice her, or if they did, they didn't care. The arrest continued, with the kind of aggression that seemed unnecessary for a teenager accused of nothing more than fitting a description. The video was uploaded within minutes, and the internet did what it does best: amplify. By the time Isaiah received the call, the footage was already making its way across social media, shared by locals who couldn't believe what they were seeing. But Isaiah hadn't seen it yet. He was still racing toward the police station, his phone buzzing with notifications he didn't have time to read. The voice on the other end of the line was calm but detached, as though reading from a script. "Mr. Brown, your son Caleb has been arrested for suspicion of theft. He's being processed at the precinct." Isaiah's hand tightened around the steering wheel. "There's been a mistake," he said firmly. "My son didn't steal anything." The officer's voice didn't change. "You can discuss that once you're here." As the call ended, Isaiah felt a mix of emotions: shock, fear, and anger. But above all, there was a growing determination. He wasn't just going to the station to pick up his son. He was going to make sure Caleb's voice was heard, that his innocence was proven, and that the people responsible for this injustice were held accountable. As Isaiah pulled into the station's parking lot, the weight of the moment pressed down on him. He had always taught Caleb to stand up for himself, to believe in justice. But now, as he walked through those heavy glass doors, Isaiah knew he was stepping into a battle, not just for his son, but for the truth. Isaiah Brown knew he couldn't rely on promises of fairness. That night, as Caleb sat behind bars, Isaiah worked relentlessly to uncover the truth. The police had accused his son of theft, but Isaiah was determined to prove them wrong, not just for Caleb, but for the principle of justice itself. His first step was obtaining the store's security footage. The store manager, initially hesitant, handed over the recordings after Isaiah calmly explained the stakes. When Isaiah watched the footage, the evidence was undeniable. The suspect's face, clothing, and build bore no resemblance to Caleb. The timestamp on the footage confirmed it. The robbery occurred while Caleb was still with his friend Marcus. Isaiah wasn't finished. He contacted Michael and gathered timestamps of their text conversations, further proving that Caleb couldn't have been near the scene of the crime. Isaiah meticulously pieced together every detail, creating a timeline that exposed the flaws in the police's accusations. While Isaiah worked behind the scenes, the video of Caleb's arrest began spreading online. Its impact was immediate. People were outraged by the aggressive tactics and baseless accusations. Protesters gathered outside the police station, chanting for justice and accountability. "Free Caleb!" echoed through the streets, growing louder with each passing hour. Parents brought their children, young activists joined with signs, and community leaders demanded answers. But the response wasn't unanimous. Some residents, fearful of change or loyal to the police, criticized the protests. Social media debates flared, with arguments on both sides dividing the community further. The town, once known for its quiet streets, became a battleground for voices demanding justice and others clinging to the status quo. Amid this turmoil, Isaiah took a calculated step. He hired a civil rights attorney, Lisa Carter, a seasoned professional known for fighting institutional bias. Together, they filed motions demanding Caleb's release and launched an investigation into the officer's actions. Their progress wasn't easy. The police department pushed back, refusing to release additional evidence, claiming it would compromise an ongoing investigation. Isaiah and Lisa faced delays, obstructions, and even thinly veiled threats. The department maintained their narrative. Caleb had acted suspiciously. But Isaiah wasn't swayed. He and Lisa secured a court order to obtain dashcam footage from the officers' patrol cars. The recordings were damning. In the footage, the officer's bias was evident. One officer remarked, "This one looks like trouble," moments before stopping Caleb. There was no mention of a traffic violation, no legitimate reason for the stop, only assumptions. The recordings painted a picture that couldn't be ignored, not by the legal system and not by the growing crowd outside the station. The protests had swelled, and news outlets began arriving, amplifying Isaiah's fight to a national stage. But the challenges weren't just external. Isaiah faced harassment, calls telling him to let it go, online attacks tarnishing his family's name, and even vandalism targeting his property. Yet, through it all, Isaiah's resolve only grew stronger. The tension reached a boiling point when Isaiah and Lisa revealed their findings at a press conference. They showed the security footage, the dashcam recordings, and the timeline that proved Caleb's innocence. The press room was silent as the evidence played out on screen, undeniable in its clarity. "This isn't just about my son," Isaiah said, his voice steady but charged with emotion. "This is about accountability, about making sure no one else's child faces this kind of injustice." The public response was overwhelming. Support for Caleb surged as more people joined the protests and demanded the officers involved be held accountable. But the battle was far from over. The police department continued to resist, and the legal fight ahead would test Isaiah's strength, patience, and determination. Isaiah knew one thing: the truth was on their side, and the world was watching. The courtroom was packed with supporters, reporters, and those eager to witness the proceedings unfold. Isaiah Brown sat beside his son Caleb, both calm but resolute. This wasn't just about clearing Caleb's name. It was about exposing a deeper injustice and demanding accountability. The prosecutor began, arguing that the officers' actions were justified, claiming they acted based on the information available at the time. The officers believed they had reason to suspect Caleb of criminal activity, the prosecutor said, attempting to rationalize the events of that night. But Lisa Carter, Caleb's attorney, methodically dismantled these claims. With precision and clarity, she presented evidence that left little room for doubt. The security footage played first. All eyes were on the screen as the timestamp confirmed that the robbery occurred while Caleb was miles away at his friend Michael's house. The suspect in the footage bore no resemblance to Caleb, and the courtroom fell silent as the reality of the mistake, or prejudice, became undeniable. Then came the dashcam footage. The audio captured the officers' comments as they decided to stop Caleb. One of them remarked, "This kid looks like trouble." The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. The defense had argued that the officers acted without bias, but the recordings told a different story. Lisa then called Michael to the stand. Confident and composed, Michael corroborated Caleb's timeline, providing an alibi backed by text messages and GPS data. Each piece of evidence aligned perfectly, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The pivotal moment came when Isaiah took the stand. He walked with deliberate steps, his expression unwavering. This was more than just testimony. It was his chance to speak truth to power. "My son, Isaiah, is the kind of young man who dreams of making the world a better place. He's worked hard to earn his scholarship, to be a role model for his peers. But that night, none of that mattered. To those officers, he wasn't a student or a son, he was just another suspect." Isaiah's words resonated throughout the room, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "This case isn't just about Caleb," he continued. "It's about the reality so many families face. It's about a system that often judges people not by their actions but by their appearance, and it's about ensuring that no other parent has to sit here, fighting to prove their child's innocence when the evidence already speaks for itself." The prosecutor attempted to undermine Isaiah's testimony, suggesting his emotions clouded his perspective. But Isaiah didn't falter. "This isn't about emotion," he replied firmly. "This is about facts, and the facts show that Caleb was innocent from the beginning." As Lisa concluded her case, the evidence was irrefutable. The security footage, the dashcam audio, and the witness testimonies all painted the same picture. Caleb had been wrongfully accused, and the officers' actions were rooted in bias rather than legitimate suspicion. The prosecutor's closing remarks were defensive, attempting to justify the officers' actions as reasonable under the circumstances. But the judge's expression remained critical, her skepticism evident as she reviewed the evidence. For Isaiah and Caleb, the wait for the verdict felt endless. But in that courtroom, the fight for justice had already set a precedent. This wasn't just a trial, it was a reckoning, a demand for change, and a call for accountability that could no longer be ignored. The courtroom was silent as the judge prepared to deliver her decision. After reviewing the evidence, the testimonies, and the recordings, she spoke with a clear and decisive tone. "The evidence presented today leaves no doubt that Caleb Brown was wrongfully accused and subjected to unnecessary force. The court hereby clears Caleb of all charges. Furthermore, I am recommending immediate disciplinary action against the officers involved in this incident." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the courtroom. For Isaiah and Caleb, it was a moment of vindication. The truth had prevailed, but the scars of the experience would remain. As the family stood together, the judge continued. This case serves as a reminder of the responsibilities held by law enforcement to act without bias and uphold the principles of justice for all citizens. The department must do better. The ruling didn't end there. The police department, facing mounting pressure from the protests and media attention, issued a formal public apology to Caleb and his family. The chief of police, speaking to reporters outside the courthouse, announced a series of reforms, including mandatory bias training for officers and the establishment of a community oversight board. For Caleb, the apology was a step forward, but for Isaiah, it was a reminder of how far there was to go. Justice had been served, but only because they had refused to back down. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had swelled. Supporters held signs, chanted Caleb's name, and cheered as the family emerged. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment as Isaiah stepped forward to address the gathering. He began, his voice steady, but filled with emotion. Today we proved that truth still matters. We proved that justice can prevail when we stand together and refuse to be silent. But this isn't just about my son. This is about every family that's had to face this kind of fight. This is about ensuring no parent has to worry about their child being judged unfairly because of the color of their skin. The crowd erupted into applause, but Isaiah wasn't finished. Justice must be for everyone, not just for those who can afford to fight for it. Today we took a step forward, but the fight doesn't end here. We must keep pushing, keep holding those in power accountable, and keep demanding better for our children, our communities, and our future. The cheers grew louder as Isaiah stepped back, placing a hand on Caleb's shoulder. For Caleb, it was a moment of pride, knowing his father's unwavering determination had turned an unjust accusation into a victory for truth. This story is more than a single victory. It's a testament to the power of persistence and the importance of standing up against injustice, even when the odds seem insurmountable. It's a reminder that change doesn't happen overnight. It happens when ordinary people refuse to accept what's wrong and demand what's right. For Isaiah and Caleb, this fight wasn't just about clearing a name. It was about creating a ripple effect, inspiring others to speak and act. Their voices, determination, and refusal to stay silent became catalysts for change in their community. Thank you for watching. Hit the subscribe button, like, and comment where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you and join us in shining a light on injustice, one story at a time. Together, we can create conversations that matter and build a community that stands for change.